Imagine this. You're standing at the edge of a chessboard so vast you cannot see its boundaries. The pieces move on their own, following patterns you've never chosen. Kings fall, pawns advance, and you've been playing this game your entire life without ever realizing you could step off the board. Every decision you've made, every path you've followed, every dream you've chased, what if none of it was truly yours? What if the very framework of success, happiness, and meaning you've been operating within was designed not to liberate you, but to contain you? Think about the last time you made a major life decision. Did you choose it, or did it choose you? Was it born from the depths of your authentic desire, or was it the inevitable conclusion of 1,000 invisible forces, parental expectations, societal programming, economic pressures, cultural narratives, all conspiring to guide your hand toward a predetermined outcome? The uncomfortable truth is this: most of us are not playing the game of life. We are being played by it. Consider the architect who dreamed of building revolutionary structures, but became an accountant because it was practical. The writer who silenced their voice to pursue corporate stability. The entrepreneur who never launched because the risks seemed too great, the timing never quite right, the resources always just out of reach. These aren't stories of failure. They're stories of people who never questioned whether they were playing the right game at all. But before we go deeper, if this resonates with you, if you're ready to challenge everything you thought you knew about success and start redesigning your reality, subscribe now and turn on notifications. What you're about to discover will fundamentally shift how you see every obstacle, every opportunity, and every choice you make from this moment forward. Don't miss what comes next. But here's where it gets truly unsettling. What if the game itself, the entire system of rules, rewards, and punishments you've internalized, is a constructed reality? Not a natural law, not an immutable truth, but a collective hallucination we've all agreed to participate in? The philosopher Immanuel Kant understood that we don't experience reality as it is. We experience it through the lens of our conditioning. We see the world not as it exists, but as we've been taught to see it. And if that's true, then every limitation you've accepted, every boundary you've respected, every impossibility you've surrendered to, might be nothing more than a phantom. The game has rules. Work hard and you'll succeed. Follow the path and you'll find security. Play it safe and you'll be protected. But look around. How many people followed these rules to the letter and still found themselves trapped in lives that feel hollow? How many sacrificed their present for a future that never materialized? How many discovered too late that the prize at the end of the game wasn't what they wanted at all? There's a deeper question lurking beneath all of this, one that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. What if winning the game everyone else is playing is the ultimate form of losing? What if the true victory isn't climbing to the top of a ladder someone else built, but recognizing you have the power to build your own? What if the greatest act of rebellion isn't breaking the rules, but realizing they were always optional? Right now, in this very moment, you're at a crossroads. You can continue playing by the established rules, hoping that if you just work a little harder, strategize a little better, sacrifice a little more, you'll finally get ahead. Or you can do something far more radical. You can recognize that the game itself is negotiable, that the systems you've been taught to revere aren't natural laws, but human constructs, and what humans have constructed, humans can reconstruct. But before you can flip the game in your favor, you must first understand why it was designed this way in the first place. You must see the invisible architecture that has shaped your choices, limited your vision, and convinced you that the cage you're in is the entire world. Only then can you begin to dismantle it. Only then can you become not just a player, but the architect of an entirely new game, one where the rules serve you, not the other way around. The question isn't whether you can flip the game. The question is, are you ready to see how deep this goes? The game was never designed for you to win. Let that sink in for a moment. The systems, structures, and hierarchies that govern modern life weren't created with your liberation in mind. They were engineered for stability, predictability, and control. And the most insidious part? You've been taught to police yourself, to internalize the rules so deeply that you enforce your own limitations without anyone needing to watch over you. Friedrich Nietzsche called this the herd mentality, the phenomenon where individuals surrender their unique will to the collective, adopting the values, beliefs, and behaviors of the masses not because they're true, but because they're safe. Safety, after all, is the great seducer. It promises comfort in exchange for conformity, security in exchange for self-suppression. And most people take the deal without ever realizing they've signed a contract. But why? Why do we so readily accept a game we didn't design, playing by rules we never agreed to? The answer lies in what Carl Jung identified as the collective unconscious, a shared reservoir of archetypes, symbols, and narratives that shape human behavior across cultures and generations. From the moment you're born, you're immersed in stories about what it means to be successful, worthy, and valuable. The hero's journey, the American dream, the self-made billionaire, these aren't just stories. They're psychological programming, subtle instructions on how to think, what to desire, and where to direct your energy. The philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre understood this trap intimately. He argued that humans are condemned to be free, yet most of us flee from that freedom into what he called bad faith, living inauthentically by adopting roles, identities, and scripts written by others. The accountant who hates numbers but continues calculating. The lawyer who despises litigation but keeps litigating. The parent who repeats the same patterns they resented in their own childhood. These aren't conscious choices. They're acts of self-abandonment disguised as responsibility. This is the hidden problem. The game isn't rigged against you in some obvious, visible way. It's far more sophisticated than that. The game operates through psychological conditioning, creating desire where there was none, manufacturing scarcity where abundance exists, and convincing you that your worth is tied to external validation, the job title, the salary, the relationship status, the social media following. You're not chasing success. You're chasing the approval of a system that profits from your perpetual striving. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration camps, discovered something profound in the midst of unimaginable suffering. Those who found meaning in their circumstances, who could connect their suffering to a larger purpose, were more likely to survive. But here's the twist. He also recognized that modern society creates a different kind of concentration camp, one built not with barbed wire but with comfort and convenience. We're trapped not by external force but by internal emptiness, what Frankl called the existential vacuum. We fill this void with consumption, achievement, and distraction, never stopping long enough to ask whether any of it actually matters. The game keeps you running on a treadmill, always moving but never arriving, always achieving but never satisfied. And the moment you start to question it, the system has a response. You're lazy. You're ungrateful. You're not trying hard enough. The problem isn't the game, it's you. But what if the opposite is true? What if your dissatisfaction, your restlessness, your gnawing sense that something is fundamentally wrong, what if these aren't signs of personal failure but signals of awakening? What if the very discomfort you've been trying to suppress is actually your consciousness rebelling against a reality that was never meant to serve you? The question now becomes, if the game was designed to keep you contained, what happens when you refuse to play? The consequences of playing a game designed to contain you aren't immediately visible. They don't announce themselves with dramatic collapses or sudden revelations. Instead, they accumulate slowly, like sediment at the bottom of a river, until one day you look up and realize you've been living someone else's life for decades. The first consequence is the erosion of your authentic self. Psychologists call this identity foreclosure, the process by which you adopt a ready-made identity without ever exploring who you truly are. You become the role you play, the dutiful employee, the responsible parent, the successful professional. These aren't inherently bad identities, but when they become your entire existence, when there's no space left for the parts of you that don't fit the script, something essential withers away. You look in the mirror and see a stranger wearing your face, performing a life that looks successful from the outside but feels hollow from within. Neuroscience reveals why this happens. Your brain is wired for efficiency, constantly creating neural pathways that automate behavior. The more you repeat an action, thought pattern, or emotional response, the stronger those pathways become. This is beautiful when you're learning a skill or developing a healthy habit. But it becomes a prison when those automated patterns are built around other people's expectations. Your brain literally rewires itself to pursue goals you don't actually want, to feel emotions you've been taught to feel, to desire things you've been conditioned to desire. You become a biological machine, optimized for playing a game you never consciously chose. The second consequence is what cognitive psychologists call learned helplessness, a state where you've internalized failure and limitation so deeply that you stop trying to escape even when escape becomes possible. It starts with small defeats, the job application rejected, the creative project dismissed, the risk that didn't pay off. Each failure reinforces a narrative. This is just how things are. This is my place in the world. Better not to try than to be disappointed again. The game teaches you to accept your position on the board, to stop questioning whether you could move differently, play differently, or leave the board entirely. But perhaps the most insidious consequence is the loss of time, not just hours and days, but decades. The cognitive bias known as the sunk cost fallacy keeps you invested in paths that no longer serve you simply because you've already invested so much. You stay in the career because you've already spent 10 years building it. You maintain the relationship because you've already invested so much emotional energy. You continue pursuing the goal because abandoning it now would mean admitting that all those years were misdirected. The game traps you not through force, but through your own reluctance to admit you've been playing the wrong game all along. Cultural conditioning amplifies all of this. We live in societies that worship productivity, that measure human worth in economic output, that treat rest as laziness and introspection as self-indulgence. The game demands constant motion, perpetual striving, endless optimization. Stop for even a moment, and the anxiety rushes in. Am I falling behind? Am I wasting my potential? What will people think? This anxiety isn't a personal failing. It's a feature of the system, designed to keep you running, consuming, producing, never pausing long enough to realize you're exhausted from chasing things you don't actually want. And here's what makes this truly dangerous. The longer you play, the more you have to lose by questioning it. Your identity becomes fused with your position in the game. Your relationships are built around shared participation in the game. Your sense of security, meaning, and purpose all depend on continuing to play. The cost of leaving doesn't just feel high, it feels existential. But what if that fear, that sense of impossibility, is the final barrier between you and genuine freedom? What if the very thing you're most afraid to lose is precisely what's keeping you trapped? The rebellion begins not with action, but with a single, radical shift in perception, recognizing that the game is a construct, and constructs can be deconstructed. This isn't about rejecting society or abandoning responsibility. It's about understanding that the rules you've been following aren't laws of nature, they're agreements you never consciously made. And any agreement you didn't consciously enter, you have the power to consciously exit. The first step is what philosophers call phenomenological reduction, stripping away all the layers of conditioning to see what remains. Ask yourself, if you removed every expectation placed on you by parents, teachers, employers, society, and culture, what would you actually want? Not what you've been taught to want, not what would make you look successful, but what genuinely calls to you from the deepest part of your being. This question is terrifying because most people have spent so long performing their lives that they've forgotten there's an authentic self beneath the performance. Consider the story of Paul Gauguin, the French stockbroker who abandoned his comfortable life, his family, and his career at age 35 to pursue painting in Tahiti. By every conventional measure, he made the wrong choice. He lived in poverty, was rejected by the art establishment of his time, and died in relative obscurity. Yet his work later became recognized as revolutionary. And more importantly, he spent his final years creating art that expressed his deepest truth. He chose authenticity over approval, meaning over security. He stopped playing the game everyone expected him to play and created his own. But rebellion doesn't require such dramatic gestures. Sometimes it's as simple as recognizing your leverage, the unique combination of skills, experiences, and perspectives that only you possess. The game wants you to believe you're interchangeable, that your value comes from how well you conform to predefined roles. The truth is far more powerful. Your uniqueness is your greatest asset, but only if you're willing to use it. What can you do that others can't? What perspective do you have that others miss? What problem can you solve that others don't even see? The second element of rebellion is embracing strategic risk, not reckless gambling, but calculated moves that position you outside the predictable patterns everyone else follows. Risk is terrifying only when you're playing a game you don't want to win. When you're pursuing something authentic, risk transforms into possibility. The entrepreneur who leaves corporate security to build something meaningful isn't being irresponsible. They're recognizing that the real risk is spending their one life building someone else's dream. This requires reframing failure entirely. The game teaches you to fear failure as the opposite of success, but that's a lie designed to keep you cautious and contained. Failure is information. It's feedback. Every attempt that doesn't work eliminates one path and points you toward others. Thomas Edison didn't fail 10,000 times before inventing the light bulb. He successfully discovered 10,000 ways that didn't work. J.K. Rowling's rejections weren't proof she couldn't write. They were proof she hadn't yet found the right opportunity. The only real failure is never attempting to play your own game at all. The third act of rebellion is controlling your narrative. How you present yourself, your work, and your vision to the world. The game wants you to shrink, to hide your ambitions, to apologize for taking up space. But those who reshape reality understand that perception shapes opportunity. This isn't about manipulation or false presentation. It's about refusing to let others define you by their limited expectations. When you control your narrative, you position yourself as a problem solver, an innovator, someone who creates value in ways others haven't imagined. Finally, and perhaps most critically, rebellion requires curating your environment with ruthless intentionality. You cannot break free from a game while remaining surrounded by people who are invested in you continuing to play it. The philosopher Seneca understood this. Associate with people who are likely to improve you. Welcome those whom you can improve. The process is a mutual one. Men learn as they teach. Your environment either reinforces your conditioning or supports your liberation. There is no neutral ground. Breaking free isn't a single moment of awakening. It's a series of choices, each one moving you further from the predetermined path and closer to something authentic. But once you begin, once you taste that freedom, returning to the old game becomes impossible. You've seen behind the curtain. You can't unsee it. Here's the truth that will either liberate you or unsettle you completely. The game you've been trying to win doesn't actually exist. Not in the way you think it does. It exists only as a shared hallucination, a collective agreement to treat arbitrary rules as if they were absolute truths. And the moment you truly understand this, not intellectually, but viscerally, everything changes. The philosopher Alan Watts spent his life trying to communicate this paradox. You are not in the universe. You are the universe expressing itself at a particular point in space and time. The separation between you and the world, between player and game, is an illusion. You've been conditioned to see yourself as a separate entity trying to navigate an external reality. But what if you are the reality? What if the distinction between winning and losing, success and failure, is itself part of the game's construction? Consider this. Every system, every hierarchy, every structure of power and meaning exists because we collectively agree to uphold it. Money has value because we agree it does. Status matters because we agree it matters. Success looks a certain way because we've agreed on what it looks like. But these agreements aren't cosmic laws, they're social contracts, and like all contracts, they can be renegotiated or abandoned entirely. Viktor Frankl discovered this in the concentration camps, in the absolute nadir of human experience. Stripped of everything, possessions, status, even basic dignity, he found that the one thing the Nazis couldn't take was his ability to choose how he interpreted his suffering. In the space between stimulus and response, he found freedom. Not freedom from his circumstances, but freedom within them. He realized that meaning isn't something the world gives you. It's something you create, regardless of external conditions. This is the ultimate game flip. The realization that you've been seeking external validation for an internal experience. You've been trying to win approval, accumulate achievements, and reach some imagined finish line, believing that these things would finally make you feel whole, successful, worthy. But wholeness isn't something you achieve. It's something you recognize you already possess once you stop outsourcing your sense of self to external metrics. But here's where it gets even more profound. When you stop playing for external validation and start operating from authentic alignment, something paradoxical happens. The success you are chasing often arrives naturally, not because you're trying harder, but because you're no longer fragmented. When your actions align with your deepest values, when your work expresses something genuine rather than performing for approval, people sense it. Authenticity is magnetic. It creates opportunities, attracts collaborators, and opens doors not because you're manipulating outcomes, but because you're finally operating as an integrated whole rather than a fractured collection of conflicting desires. Steve Jobs understood this intuitively. His obsession wasn't market share or quarterly profits. It was creating technology that reflected his vision of beauty, simplicity, and human connection. That passion, that uncompromising authenticity, became Apple's greatest asset. People didn't just buy products. They bought into a vision that resonated with something deeper than consumer need. So how do you actually live this truth? How do you transition from understanding it intellectually to embodying it completely? First, reconnect with your core values, not the values you've been told to have, but the ones that genuinely resonate when you strip away all external noise. What brings you alive? What would you pursue even if no one was watching? Even if there was no reward, no recognition, no validation? That's your compass. Everything else is decoration. Second, set goals that emerge from those values rather than from external expectations. These aren't just career objectives. They might involve relationships, creativity, personal growth, contribution to something larger than yourself. Authentic goals have a different quality than imposed ones. They energize rather than deplete. They feel like expansion rather than obligation. Third, cultivate resilience through purpose. Life will still present challenges, perhaps even more challenging than before because you're no longer playing it safe. But when you're anchored in purpose, those challenges become meaningful. You're not just enduring difficulty. You're growing through it, becoming stronger because you're rooted in something that transcends temporary setbacks. Fourth, curate your environment with absolute intentionality. Surround yourself with people who support your authentic journey, not those who need you to remain who you were. Build a community that reflects your values and aspirations. This isn't about superiority or exclusion. It's about recognizing that you cannot transform while immersed in environments that reinforce your old patterns. Fifth, celebrate progress over perfection. The game you're creating for yourself isn't about flawless execution. It's about continuous evolution, exploration, and growth. Every step forward, no matter how small, is a victory because it represents movement towards something authentic rather than performance for something external. But here's the final, most liberating insight. The ultimate way to win the game is to recognize you were never playing against anyone in the first place. The competition, the scarcity, the fear that you're falling behind, these are all artifacts of the old game, the one designed to keep you running on a treadmill. When you step off, you realize there's no race. There's only your unique path, unfolding at its own pace, guided by your own internal compass. You are not just a player in life's game. You are the architect of the game itself. You have the power to question every rule, redefine every measure of success, and create a life that resonates with your deepest truths. The systems that seemed immovable are revealed as nothing more than agreements, and you never signed them. So what will you do with this knowledge? Will you return to the comfortable predictability of playing by rules that were never designed for your flourishing? Or will you step into the uncertain, exhilarating freedom of becoming the author of your own existence? The choice has always been yours. The game was always optional. The cage was always unlocked. You were always free. You just needed to remember. Now, architect of your own reality, what game will you create?